The following is a recording of a vaccine forum that was organized by Tri-Valley Indivisible. It consists of an educational presentation and panel discussion with physicians and scientists. We provide tools to have a productive and informative conversation with people about vaccines. There are 4 topics that we touch on to help with this conversation. First, we walk through how to explain how vaccines work. Research has shown that using metaphors can be more informative and persuasive than just talking about the biological mechanism. We also show some data that clearly illustrates the dramatic positive benefits of vaccine utilization. Since vaccines can be a topic that comes with a lot of baggage, next we talk about the future of vaccines in the context of diseases which people understand the impact of and are more affected by, such as cancer and autoimmune conditions. Cutting-edge vaccine research could help treat and cure these diseases. Third, we provide a framework to have this conversation in a productive and empathetic way. Lastly, we touch upon what are the vaccine policy changes happening at the federal level and why it matters. Before diving into our conversation with our really wonderful panelists. Also, just a quick disclaimer, everyone here today is speaking in their personal capacity.
To talk about vaccines and understand vaccines for chickenpox to cancer. And the goal today is really to understand how to appropriately talk about vaccines and really build trust around that. And we have 3 wonderful panelists that we'll be talking to about this exact topic. So Dr. Shah is a hematologist oncologist at UCSF. He has an MD PhD and has done a lot of research on chronic myeloid leukemia. He joined the UCSF faculty in 2006 and is also the chair of the National Comprehensive Cancer Network of Chronic Myeloid Leukemia Guidelines Panel. And his lab is really working to conduct a lot of sort of molecular studies to understand human leukemias. So we're really, really excited to have him here. We also have Dr. Donnell Moody, and she's a board certified pediatrician and is a clinical leader in the Tri-Valley healthcare area, specifically providing healthcare safety nets for people. She earned her Doctor of Osteopathy at Western University and also has a Master of Public Health. And we're really excited for our conversation with her. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Shelley Facenti. She is a professor at Berkeley School of Public Health and has a PhD and also a Master's of Public Health. Her PhD is in epidemiology, also from Berkeley. And she's done a lot of work in the community around COVID-19 prevention protocol and making sort of evidence-based decisions around vaccination programs and policies based around what our current scientific knowledge is. And then we're really excited for our conversation with these 3 really great doctors and scientists. Before we dive into that conversation, we'll actually be just giving a little bit over an overview. So myself, my name is Isha Tolia, and I'm a scientist, and I work in cancer diagnostic testing. So I'll be sort of giving an overview of some of this, and Dr. Louise McNitt will also be helping with giving sort of just an overview of what is happening right now in the news. Dr. Louise McNitt is a physician that specializes in preventative medicine and also public health. She's worked in local health departments in California in communicable disease control and now works in the immunization program at the California Department of Public Health. We're all here sort of in our personal capacities, talking about sort of our thoughts on how to think about vaccines and how to appropriately have conversations with people in your lives about vaccines. So I'll start off talking about how vaccines work, what is sort of the future of vaccines, how can you talk to people about vaccines, and then Dr. McNitt will talk to us a little bit about vaccines in the news and a lot of things that you might be hearing right now. And then we will be moving to our conversation with our panelists. So before we get started, there's a little bit of housekeeping that I want to do, which is just let everyone know that this is a webinar, which means that you won't be able to unmute yourself, but you will be able to put questions in the Q&A box. So we want this to be a place where you can get your questions answered. So as we're going through the presentation, please put your questions in the chat. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. And the slides will be emailed to you afterwards, and we'll also provide some helpful links. And there will also be a recording of this entire presentation that we'll provide. But yeah, so let's get started. And so want to talk a little bit about how vaccines work. And I think one way to really do this in a way that is understandable to a lot of people, because we all come from very different backgrounds in terms of understanding, and especially when you're trying to have a conversation with someone who might be a little unsure about how they feel about vaccines, is to really start off with a metaphor. So I want to basically share this metaphor for talking about vaccines. So let me just, we will have to share a different screen for 1 second. Yeah, so this is a metaphor using a castle to talk about how our body is a castle that we are trying to protect, and how do vaccines sort of help in that process. So let me just start this.
Isha, I don't think we're getting any sound.
Sorry.
There's no sound for.
Oh, there's no sound.
Yeah.
Okay. I am so sorry. Okay, I do have a backup plan for this. Okay. So let's go back here.
If you have an opportunity to swap displays, that may also work if this.
Yeah, so let's try this, and I will try to actually
to understand them.
Let's see. Okay.
Vaccines work. Vaccines enable your immune system to 1, stop you getting infected by viruses, or 2, if you do get infected, end the infection itself. Picture your body as a medieval castle surrounded by an army of invading viruses. Your first line of defense is an outer wall patrolled by archers, your antibodies. If they can hold the viral army off, you won't get infected. But if they're overwhelmed, the virus can break through. Once the virus is inside, you have an infection. However, you still have elite troops inside the castle, your memory B and T cells. These elite cells are ready to repel the invaders. Vaccines train all of your body's troops. However, the archer antibodies sometimes forget their training. That's when the vaccine's effectiveness wanes, and you may be infected even after vaccination. But the memory cells inside the castle can still organize quickly to repel invaders. That's when vaccines protect you from serious illness and death, if not from infection. For viruses that won't go away or change over time, boosters can strengthen your defending army. Boosters ensure there are enough archers to defend the outer wall and provide the elite troops inside the castle with updated training so they're prepared for potential invaders. Your troops might still manage without boosters. However, since boosters typically contain updated information about the virus, facing the infection without boosters puts them at a disadvantage, with fewer resources and less knowledge.
Yeah, so that's sort of just an overview of how vaccines are helping to protect us. And there are studies that show that utilizing a metaphor to help people understand makes it a little bit easier to, first of all, just understand the complex biology that is happening, but also makes it a little bit easier for to persuade someone if they are a little concerned about certain aspects of how vaccines work. So the number of cases of disease are dramatically reduced when vaccines are introduced. So I think this is a really useful data point to use when talking to people about why are vaccines important? Why do we even want to take them? So if you look at cases for things like diphtheria, measles, mumps, rubella, smallpox, before the vaccine was introduced versus after the vaccine is introduced, we go from something like maybe 158 or 3,000 cases in the case of measles to close to 0 cases per million per year. This is anywhere from 100% to like a 97% decrease in cases. This is pretty dramatic. Not only that, but vaccines also save lives. So childhood vaccines are estimated to have saved 154 lives of kids over the last 50 years. So as you can see, a lot of this is coming from measles, but a variety of other diseases as well. And I guess the other thing that I wanted to just quickly mention is some cutting edge research that is being done on the vaccine front. I think we always think about vaccines like measles or chickenpox or things like that, but vaccine research is pretty wide. And on the left, I'm showing an example of cancer vaccines. So, I mean, 40% of people in their lifetime will be diagnosed with cancer at some point. So traditionally, we think about a vaccine as something where you have some kind of response to maybe a targeted protein or something like that. And because you've seen this insult in the past, when you see a virus in the future, your immune cells are trained to be able to clear that virus. However, you can use a similar type of strategy in a therapeutic setting. So if someone has cancer, there are actually unique proteins that are on cancer cells that can be that your immune system can be trained to basically recognize, and then your immune system itself can kill cancer cells. And then the other thing that is also very, very recent is this idea of inverse vaccines for autoimmune diseases. So autoimmune diseases, there are 65% of people have an autoimmune disease, such as rheumatoid arthritis or type 1 diabetes. And typically, you think of a vaccine as something that you train to basically attack something that is foreign. However, in the case of autoimmune diseases, effectively your immune system is attacking something it shouldn't. So you can actually remove the memory of one very specific molecule to basically have a reverse vaccine as a therapy for very, very common diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and type 1 diabetes. And the reason I want to share this information is because I think there's a lot of conversation about MMR and a lot of these vaccines that we talk about often, and there's a lot of baggage that comes with talking about some of these topics. But I think everyone has experienced cancer or some of these autoimmune diseases, either themselves or someone that they know very closely. And I think it's much easier to have a conversation about cancer or rheumatoid arthritis and type 1 diabetes. People are maybe more willing to engage on that front and understand that these are some of the things that we're gaining from doing a lot of this vaccine work. So I guess, why are we here? Why are we talking about vaccines to begin with? So the reason we are here and talking about this is because vaccination rates across the country are going down. And a lot of this is for a variety of reasons, but this is concerning. So this is a plot that shows the rate of vaccination for US kindergartners from 2011 to 2024. And we see there's a target rate at around 95% to get sort of herd immunity. And we're sort of falling under that for the US overall. And we've seen the effects of this to an extent with the outbreak in Texas for measles. So this is an important conversation to have. So how do we have this conversation, right? So there is a technique called motivational interviewing that a lot of physicians and other professionals use to talk to people about making decisions. So this is a very general technique for decision making. And the goal is to be collaborative and very goal oriented, right? And to find a personal motivation for someone to do something. And this is sort of the technique I think we want to talk about for talking to someone in your life about vaccines. So there are sort of 4 pillars of this technique. One is asking really, really open-ended questions. So trying to understand where are they coming from in terms of their vaccine experience and perspectives. You really want to be able to understand this person's viewpoint. You want to affirm that the concerns that they have may be extremely valid, even if you don't fully agree with them. And then also reflect on sort of on why they're feeling this way and how to sort of to affirm how they're feeling, but also to maybe provide data and talk about what is available if that is something that they're open to. And then at the end, maybe summarize in some way that like this is something that impacts you for X reason, and it's important to remember X, Y, or Z. These are really difficult conversations to have, and one conversation is not going to change someone's mind. But I think being very open to the conversation, being empathetic and coming at it in a way where you allow for continued conversation, even if you don't agree. And again, we'll talk to our panelists more about this topic, so I won't spend too much time. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it over to Dr. McNitt to talk about what's going on right now at the federal level.
Hi, so good morning, everyone. I just wanted to go over very briefly, because there's been a lot of things in the news about the Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. and kind of what's going on at the FDA and the CDC and kind of what that all means to us. So I just wanted to briefly describe the usual regulatory process for how vaccines come into use in the US. So what typically happens is that a vaccine manufacturer applies for licensure or authorization to the FDA. There's a panel of outside experts at the FDA that reviews that data and advises whether or not the vaccine should be authorized. That committee is called VRBAC, which stands for Vaccines and Related Biologics Advisory Committee, which is kind of a mouthful. After the FDA licenses or authorizes a vaccine, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, reviews the data and makes recommendations on how vaccines should be used in the US. So which populations would be recommended to get vaccinated. And typically then the CDC adopts the recommendations that are made by ACIP. So next slide, please, Isha. So recent actions by the Health and Human Services Secretary and by high-level leaders in the FDA have kind of disrupted this usual process. So things that have came out in the news that were commented about a lot and caused a lot of concern in the medical community is that the FDA and then RFK Jr. kind of made unilateral decisions about how the COVID vaccine should be used. So first, the FDA announced that they would change the process for approval of future seasonal COVID vaccines. So how the decisions are made about who's recommended for to get vaccinated kind of depends on studies that are conducted throughout the COVID season. And the FDA decided that that process would be changed in such a way that could potentially delay the availability of COVID vaccines. And they also said that they would recommend the vaccine only for people 65 years and over and people with underlying medical conditions and people who are pregnant. And then about a week later, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced on X, which is our favorite way to get new policy information, that healthy children and pregnant women should not receive the COVID vaccine. So this kind of completely bypassed the usual process for panels, of experts that are really from, ACIP is made up of people who are who practice medicine or who are involved with virology and epidemiology, and other disciplines that are important to vaccination, to have a say in how these vaccines should be used. So that process was completely usurped. And then just a few weeks ago, the HHS secretary fired all 17 members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices and replaced them with 8 people that he handpicked. One of those people had to drop out due to financial conflicts of interest. So now there's only 7 people. So it used to be that there were 17 members, people who were extensively vetted for their expertise and for any conflicts. The vetting could take from several months to a couple of years in some cases, I've heard. So we went from that group to now this very small group of people who really haven't had any vetting and were just personally picked by the secretary. So there's been a lot of news articles about this. A lot of leading medical organizations have really expressed a lot of concern and put out statements about these changes. So this new group had a meeting just this past Wednesday and Thursday. And so all eyes were really on that meeting that happened this past week. So next slide, please. So why is this important? The ACIP recommended vaccines are required to be covered by insurers under the Affordable Care Act. So if there's any changes to the recommended vaccines that could impact availability and accessibility, because insurers may decide that they're not going to provide coverage for vaccines that are taken off the vaccine schedule. Also, ACIP is responsible for determining which vaccines are covered by the Vaccines for Children program. Vaccines for Children is a federal program that provides free vaccine to children who are or underinsured. And about 50% of children in California and about 50% of children nationwide receive vaccines through the VSC program. So the formulary for vaccines on VSC is extremely important. And just, one thing that in particular that affects California is, a lot of people, especially since COVID, get their vaccines from their pharmacist. And the way the law is written in California, a pharmacist can only independently initiate a vaccination if the vaccine is ACIP recommended. So if vaccines come off that list, then people won't be able to just go to their local pharmacy and get vaccinated, and it may be more inconvenient for them, and they may lose out on getting that vaccine. The secretary, the Health and Human Services secretary, and the new members of the ACIP have said repeatedly that these moves are in order to make the whole process more transparent and to build back trust. But in my personal opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of people in the medical community, the inconsistent recommendations that are coming out, the lack of transparency that we've seen in terms of the HHS secretary just choosing the new ACIP members, the changes that are being made. A big one for me and my job is the changes that are being made to the CDC website and particular pieces of data and information that are being taken down. All of that I feel is really unlikely to boost confidence in vaccines and actually just make people more confused and more hesitant. So kind of the bottom line is why we're all following this so closely is really concerned about any changes that will decrease access to vaccine, lower immunization rates, and risk increase outbreaks of vaccine preventable diseases. And I will turn it back to you, Isha.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive overview. Really appreciate it. So yeah, I think now we'll sort of shift over to our discussion with our panelists about a variety of these topics. And please put your questions in the chat, and we'll sort of get started here. Okay, so I guess we can. These questions are for anyone on the panel, so feel free to chime in. So I think the first question I have is sort of around in your experience, what are sort of key reasons that people may hesitate or refuse to get a vaccine, and how do you personally approach such conversations?
I'd be happy to start,
Yeah,
Isha.
thank you so much.
Great. So, I think the biggest mistake that people often make when trying to change the mind of someone who's hesitating or refusing vaccines is to sort of write them off as an anti-vaxxer or just assume like, oh, they watch too much news, Fox News, or they're stupid, they can't make good decisions. And if we approach conversations that way, then we're never going to be successful at changing people's minds, because there are some people who've really made up their minds. They're going to believe whatever they believe. They're not listening. They're not interested in a conversation, right? That's probably not worth a whole lot of energy. But I think most people hesitate or refuse vaccines because they are really worried about the safety of themselves or of people they care about. They love their kid, they love their parent, they're worried about their own health and safety. And they don't trust that just because a pharma company or the FDA or even the public health department says these things are safe, that means they're safe, right? We've all been in situations where we are mistrustful of people who, stand to make money or work for the government or whatever. That doesn't automatically earn trust for people, for a lot of people. And so sometimes there are facts that can help change minds, just giving data, giving information. But I really think most of the time the best way to approach these conversations is really a lot about what you talked about with the motivational interviewing. It's not with a slew of facts and data. It's really with a humble curiosity, like really listening deeply to what people are saying that they're concerned about. Like, what is it that, maybe even asking, like, if you don't have an answer to whatever they're concerned about, maybe just asking, is there a situation where you could imagine changing your mind on vaccines, where you would feel reassured and then be comfortable getting a vaccine or having your kid get vaccinated?
Yeah.
And that's really different than trying to convince them, than saying, like, what would convince you, right? It's like, what would reassure you? What would make you feel confident that this is the right choice? And once you have that information about what it is that they're worried about and what would make them feel reassured and feel comfortable, then you can make better decisions about what information you might have at your disposal that would actually make a difference for them. And that's how, in my experience, you're able to really make headway.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of sort of asking someone what do you need to see to change your mind, right? And that gives you sort of a good idea of, is this even something that is worth sort of continuing the conversation around?
Yeah, I'll jump
yeah,
in
yeah,
and
Dr. Moody. Yeah, please.
reinforce
Yeah.
what Dr. Facenti just
Yeah.
said. When I am in an exam room with a patient or a parent who's vaccine hesitant, I do exactly what Dr. Facenti suggested. You kind of get a gauge of where they are in the spectrum, because there is a spectrum of vaccine hesitancy. And by and large, most of them are just worried about their baby, right? They just want what's best. They want the safest, best thing for their child. And so reinforcing that and validating that concern right out the bat. Like, I know you care about your child and you want what's best for them. So let's talk about what your concerns are about vaccinating, and kind of getting a gauge of where they are on that hesitancy spectrum. And then I'm able to kind of tailor the conversation to where they're at. And there's many parents I can't convince on that first visit. It's sometimes an ongoing discussion. And for those I have gotten over the line, it may take 3, 4, 5 follow-up visits. Sometimes we make some compromises. One of my favorite resources online to direct them to, and sometimes I'll send them home with a stack of printed papers as homework to read, is the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Vaccine Education Center. It's fabulous. There's really good handouts. So that's one place you can refer people to. It's not sponsored by any pharma companies. Most people trust children's hospitals as well. They're very reputable, because this is where we send sick kids to save lives. So that's kind of how you can approach getting a gauge of where they are to start with.
Mhm. Yeah, Dr. Shaw, is there anything you'd like to sort of add, especially coming from a sort of different perspective?
Yeah, so I mostly treat patients with a type of leukemia, and they're not particularly immune compromised, but some of them do have that question. But I would say, just to sort of add a couple of things to what others have said, is that I always um, let them know that skepticism is a good thing, okay? But at the same time, I let them know that probably nobody is more skeptical than scientists, and if you can get a consensus of scientists to agree that the benefits of something clearly outweigh the risks, that's a tall order, right? And that's what really has to happen to, gain approval. And, on a tangential topic, right? When you say that 97%, or when we hear that 97% of climate experts believe that climate change is real and that it's caused by human activity, that actually, that speaks volumes, right? But when people are featured on television, the idea of giving equal time to like a very small sliver of opinion is I think that does a lot of damage in the interest of being balanced about this. I mean, really, the way that they should do it is they should have 97 people, give an opinion, and then three people if they really want to do it. Have the ratio be, more in line with that. The other thing I would say is, we all trust like weather science, right? I mean, if you're in Florida and there is a category whatever hurricane blowing through and severe damage and risk of death, people don't say, "Oh, well, what do these people know?" And, is this a hoax? And is there money behind this? You trust that science, right? When I'm getting on an airplane, I trust mechanical science. So why is it that with medical science, it gets put aside into this sort of level of skepticism that is far greater? I don't have an answer to that, but I at least try to, invite people to consider whether their level of skepticism is warranted.
Yeah, and I think actually that's an interesting point, and this is something that I've been thinking about is what it seems like the scientific community and the medical healthcare community in some ways has um, lost its like persuasiveness, right? People don't trust the community in some ways. And I would say there are a lot of factors that probably play into this, but as scientists and physicians, I think we are at fault to an extent for that lost in trust. Um, yeah, anything
Yeah, if
like,
I can just add one thing to
yeah, of
that. I
course.
mean, there are in the medical scientists profession, as in all professions, there are wingnuts amongst us, right? There are people. There was a very prominent virologist back in the 80s and into the 90s and beyond, who really was so skeptical that HIV caused AIDS, and he was a pretty well-known and respected person. So, all of us are potentially at risk for being misguided. That's why I'm saying we really have to, go with like what a consensus, is. And one last thing I'll just say, because this just, came to my mind is one thing that just makes me honestly cringe a little bit is when I would talk to a patient about getting the COVID vaccine, and they would express why they didn't want to do it because, quote, they had done their research. And I think to myself, I have not done my research, because my research would be to get the primary documents that were submitted to the FDA, the thousands of pages, and review them. That would be what is required for, quote, doing my research. And so I am putting my trust in the professionals who have done that. I'm not, it's nothing more than that. And I try to let people know that.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah. Also, I just want to remind everyone, please put your Q&As in the Q&A chat, but in the Q&A box, and not the chat box, because it's harder for us to see your questions there. Okay,
So,
so
sorry, can I just make one comment about,
yeah, of course.
and one thing we like to remind ourselves of is that vaccine hesitancy is not new. There's been people who are anti-vaccine from when the first vaccines came out. And also, anti uh, people who will really push back on any kind of infection control measures. So, there's even during the 1918 flu pandemic, there was people who were anti-mask and who refused to comply with, quarantine orders. So um, this isn't necessarily new. I think maybe there are reasons why it seems more, I don't know, intense or widespread. I mean, certainly, I think social media has something to do with that because it's much easier to spread misinformation and conspiracy theories. But yeah, just I I would hesitate to just make it seem like this is something that's just cropped up because it's kind of always been there.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, Okay, yeah. So I think I just want to talk about some common concerns that people often have. And I think this question is great for you, Dr. Moody, as a pediatrician. It seems like one of the common concerns is around childhood vaccines, and just the number of vaccines that kids have to get, and sort of the schedule that is recommended and things like that. So what is your sort of how do you address this concern when people bring it up?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I know if a parent looks at the initial ACIP recommended childhood vaccine, it looks like a lot of things before you turn a year old. But the maternal antibodies that a baby gets across the placenta, they last about 90 days. So everything mom's been vaccinated against, everything she's had infection against and mounted her own natural response, the baby's getting some protection for those first 90 days, but it does wane. So the perfect childhood vaccine kind of weighs that balance of still having some protection from mom, but letting baby develop some of their own protection early enough to avoid some of the most dangerous pathogens out there for babies. And sometimes we've even had to shift things a little earlier. One example is pertussis, whooping cough. So it goes in this sort of cyclical surge about every 7 to 10 years. And when we first recognized this was happening in California after I got out of residency, I think it was around 2007, 2008, we had a surge. We started vaccinating infants at 6 weeks instead of 2 months with their first DTaP, because that gives them extra pertussis or whooping cough protection. And that recommendation to start vaccinating moms during the third trimester with another Tdap also came out. So it's a dynamic situation, right? Sometimes we have to tailor it a little bit. But the antigens that are in childhood vaccines, so lots of studies were done on like what's the smallest effective dose to get the best response. So we're not just, using a elephant gun on babies. The studies looked for the smallest effective dose to get the best response. And over time, we've added things. And in real time, you can even see the effect of some of these. Like the rotavirus vaccine was added in 2006. It was my second year of pediatric residency. And from first year to third year, I saw an incredible decline in the number of babies we were admitting with severe diarrhea for IV fluids. So you can see these things actually happen in real time and use examples. Many of the vaccines we use, like polio and measles, they're so far removed from the current generation of parents that sometimes they forget what the threat was. But things that are more recent, like rotavirus and now nursivimab, I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that, but all pediatricians are very excited about the RSV prophylaxis. It's such a game changer. And it's a passive immunization. So instead of most of the other vaccine types are active, where we're giving the antigen, nursivimab, which we give even on day one, the day they're born or right before they get out of the hospital, it's already produced antibody and it gives passive immunization to the baby for the first 8 months of life. So you can see there's little kind of variations in these, but kind of back to the question. Sorry, I'm going on tangents. The answer I give parents who have a concern about just the number or amount of antigens that are in what we're giving the baby. In any given day out in the world, we're interacting with so many things, right? There's bacteria, viruses, fungi, you name it. We have it on our skin. There's billions in our GI tract. Our immune system is constantly surveilling, looking, it processes and gets rid of hundreds of thousands of things a day. The antigen load we give a baby is sort of a drop in the bucket compared to what we're exposed to in the real world when we're walking around. So I try to frame it that way with parents, that the amount of antigens we're giving, it might sound like a lot of shots, but the fact is it's not a very big amount for the immune system to process compared to what we go through on a daily basis, living our life on Earth with all the pathogens we share this planet with. And it's really about, protecting your baby to be safe. Like they wouldn't put their baby in a car without a car seat, right? And driving is an inherently dangerous activity. So, being around sick people, being around pathogens, that's an inherently dangerous activity. So vaccines are kind of like your car seat for being around dangerous pathogens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really like that sort of idea of comparing it to just what your body sort of experiences on the daily. And it's the vaccine is a very, very small sort of proportion of what your body, the immune system sees. So the next question is sort of around more public health and our response to pandemic level things that happen. So, Dr. Facenti, I think this would be great for you to be able to answer is what do you think the healthcare and public health community should learn from the response to COVID-19? What could we do differently and better in the
Yeah.
future?
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and you started to touch on it before, when you talked about like the loss of persuasiveness, I think for a lot of science and medicine, particularly medical and public health science. You know, I think public health's communication overall was pretty abysmal during COVID. And in fairness, I think there were a lot of political forces that led to public health professionals being undercut and undermined and even villainized actively, and that made their jobs extremely difficult. So I don't think it's fair to lay it all at the feet of public health, like people just failed to communicate. But there is something really legitimate there. Specifically communication out of the CDC was kind of a disaster during COVID. And a lot of state and local health departments were totally overwhelmed. They were trying to deal with COVID spreading and they just didn't have a lot of bandwidth left to communicate. But also, in my experience, I've had many years of public health schooling, graduate level public health schooling, and we're just not taught how to communicate with the general public very well. That's not a huge part of the curriculum of learning how to be a public health professional. And I would really love to see public health professionals learn the importance of that and sort of take it more seriously to teach that in schools, to public health school, and to really rethink the way that we train and prepare people to speak to the public and communicate clear information. I think part of what needed to be communicated back then wasn't just, I think people were craving very simple answers. They wanted to know, should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Should I get vaccinated now? Should I not? Is it safe for my kid to go to school? Is it not? And and that information evolved over time because that's how science works, right? This was a novel disease, and we kind of were making recommendations with the best information we had at the moment. And then maybe in a few months, that was a different recommendation because our understanding evolved. But because there wasn't enough communication about that, about like things might change, things might evolve. This is actually success, not failure of science. I think it
Yeah.
made it very difficult because a lot of the general public experienced it as like being like flip-flopping or not knowing what you're talking about, when really it was a proper evolution of information. So it's not just
Yeah.
about how to communicate scientific information, but like how to communicate how science works and how decisions need to be made in an evolving kind of emergency
Yeah.
situation.
And I think this is really true just generally for a lot of scientific evidence. I think people get frustrated that what is, for example, are eggs good for you? I feel like you see a different study that says, oh, they're good for you, they're not good for you. And I think all of them are valid in different ways, right? It depends on the context that you're looking at. There's new research that we look at, right? We used to give baby like babies like a little bit of alcohol to go to sleep. We've realized that's really bad to do and not something you should be doing. So like things evolve and we learn new things. And yeah, I agree. I think there's maybe not a full appreciation for how science works and how the scientific method works, and we're always trying to update our knowledge. I don't know if anyone else wants to sort of chime in on that and about the scientific process, I guess, and communicating that to the public.
Yeah, I mean, I can have a few thoughts on that just kind of briefly. So, I mean, I definitely agree that, I mean, the head of the CDC at that time was Robert, I forgot his name, but yeah, I agree that there was just a lot of like back and forthing that didn't really help things out. I had always thought that the one thing that might unite people on Earth would be like a foreign invasion, and this was the closest thing to it, right? This is something that threatened all of us, and yeah, in theory, had we all like locked down really locked down for 8 weeks across the world, we could have made a huge dent, in the trajectory. I'm not saying it would have necessarily been, gone to zero, but it could have definitely slowed the trajectory and allowed more time for preventative measures to kick in. I think that one of the key things that I saw was that we had leadership that was really more focused on how this pandemic might affect them politically. It was an election year. We had a president who was much more highly focused, and I think to this day is still more highly focused on how things affect him than on anything else, including the lives potentially of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And anytime you mix politics with anything, you get politics. You mix it with science, and you'll get tainted. It'll taint everything and render it, it'll basically render it useless in the minds of people. So yeah, I think that there were, those things that could have been different, could have been done. I think it was really the worst possible time for us because it was a re-election year and we had a president that looked at it, in my view, as something that really threatened his re-election chances first and foremost. And the idea of like instructing the CDC to not count cases so they could say that it wasn't happening. I mean, before that movie, Don't Look Up, I mean, before the pandemic, that movie, Don't Look Up, would have been like, this is not credible at all. But now after that, you can really see how there was, there's a real population, a subpopulation that will, deny things simply because they are inconvenient.
Yeah, I think that's the unfortunate world we live in. Dr. McNitt, I think you also wanted to sort of chime in.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, as a person in public health, the pandemic really was horrible. I mean, I don't know if I can stress that enough. I mean, I think everyone I work with, we all have PTSD and, we all kind of still have deep wounds from that era. I agree with Dr. Facente that there was definitely communication problems from the CDC, but I really think if we had had a different administration in at that time, I think things could have turned out really differently. So I really kind of want to lay a lot of the blame on our current president, who was president at that time, because the messaging that came from the administration was just a mess. And I also think that a lot of people took advantage of the situation for self-promotion. It should have been our greatest generation moment where the nation came together and had a united front. And even if you might have disagreed with some of what was happening, I think people should have been like, we're going to have a united front about this and we're going to fight this. I know that's really maybe totally unrealistic. There's always going to be people who have different opinions. But it just seemed like, yeah, it seemed even scientists and, people in the medical community were sort of taking advantage of the situation to kind of promote their own ideas when it should have been like, we're just gonna do this together. Yeah, so that and another thing I just wanted to say too about public health being overwhelmed. Public health in this country is always underfunded, and we go through these cycles of feast or famine. A lot of money was thrown at us during COVID, and now all that money has been taken away. In the immunization program, we have had to let go about 200 people over the past 6 months or so. And some of our COVID money was taken back by this administration. So, next time there's a pandemic, we will be short-staffed and we will not be prepared because we will once again not be funded. So just to leave you with those happy thoughts.
Yeah, I guess there is actually a follow-up question I have for you, Dr. McNitt, that from the audience. So, one person had a question about sort of the guidelines that you were talking about, the ACIP. Do you think, given these changes, there will be that we'll be able to get an updated COVID and flu vaccine in the fall? And are there any alternatives for getting these vaccines, like traveling to another country?
There will be flu vaccine available in the fall and COVID vaccine, although that vaccine is purchased well in advance. So all the flu vaccine for the fall has already been purchased.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of a question about what some some states might do with regard to this new recommendation about thimerosal, because some of the flu vaccine is in multi-dose vials that contains thimerosal. It's a pretty small proportion, maybe about 5% of the total flu vaccine that's given in the US.
Mhm.
But, like California, we've ordered some, we have some, and how are people going to be feeling about taking it or giving it, even though there's actually no evidence that thimerosal causes any harm.
Mhm.
Um, and as for COVID vaccine, yes, that the vaccine has been bought, that is being manufactured right now. We are waiting for ACIP to vote on it before this change in the committee membership. There was supposed to be a vote on it this past week, but I think there is going to be an extra meeting that's going to happen over the summer. So hopefully then they'll vote on recommendations at that time.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. We're getting sort of close to the end of our time, so I want to sort of look to the future a little bit. So, um, we've talked a lot about sort of the pandemic, how to talk to people about their hesitancy about vaccines. But I think one way that I think could be useful to approach this conversation is to talk about what would you be missing out on if we did not continue to do a lot of this research on vaccines and vaccine development. So with a lot of the funding cuts and things like that, I guess what are your concerns there? Why is sustained, if you had to, I guess, convince someone, why is sustained research funding critical to vaccine development and so to public health in general, even if there isn't like a public health emergency at this moment right now? And actually, Dr. Shah, I'd like to start with you, and if you could just also talk a little bit about sort of cancer vaccines and sort of the therapeutic side of things. And also, I think there is new research on preventative cancer vaccines as well. So, yeah, if you could just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so in terms of the impact on vaccine development, there are probably others that are more, appropriate on this panel to talk about that. But I mean, I would say that, I'm old enough to remember when in the 80s or 90s, a lot of people would criticize the medical science community, say, how come they're so focused on treatment and not on prevention? And then I think vaccines are really the ultimate prevention, right? I mean, yeah, you have to take an injection, but, ultimately, if you really want to prevent something, you should be really pro-vaccine, right? But I think, the cuts are really, I mean, I just read this morning that Stanford has decreased its budget by 140 million. We got in dollars. We got an email at UCSF that 200 people were being, let go this past week. Just the broader issue, not necessarily just on vaccines, but on funding the NIH. This is the reason you can't just turn it off, and some people don't, including some of my in-laws, don't understand this, that it's not as though you can say, oh, well, these people can go on unemployment and come back after a year or whatever, and everything will be fine. You're going to lose the momentum, and on top of that, the people who go into this profession, I mean, like, for me, it was 3 years working in a lab after college. It was 5 years getting my PhD, 4 years getting my MD, 2 years in residency, and 5 years in fellowship, and then I was ready to get a job. So that's like 25 years of like formal education. People aren't going to go into that if they think that on the whim of the president, that can be severely cut. They're going to choose other careers. It's just too unstable. And there's beginning to be a brain drain from the US. We're not only are we not attracting talent from other countries that's really been transformative to our economy over the past century, but we are losing people. So, again, now coming back to, I mean, we are at the stage where, and this has been true for a long time, we're capable, due to technological advances, to make more advances faster than ever before. And the idea that we would just cut that, for whatever reason, to give tax breaks to billionaires or whatever, it's just mind-boggling in my opinion.
Mhm.
Yeah, if I could add a couple things
Yeah, of
about
course.
preventative cancer vaccines too. We have a couple. Hep B is at its heart a cancer prevention vaccine, right? Chronic Hep B is a major cause of liver cancer, and the HPV vaccine, which is really transformative. Both of those are cancer prevention, and who knows what could be developed in the future with appropriate funding. But I was really worried. I read some of the ACIP notes from this past meeting. They started talking about whether hepatitis B was necessary at birth. And we use that as a way to prevent infants from getting it when it's not detected in the mother, because that's a major cause, like perinatal transition or infection passing from mother to infant. And those infants can go on to have very high risk of cancer. So Hep B is at its heart a cancer prevention vaccine. So if you talk to parents who are worried, oh, I don't want to get it in the exam room, I would rather wait until, the routine childhood vaccine. It's so incredibly low risk, low side effects, but huge benefit if that Hep B infection isn't detected.
Mhm. Yeah. Dr. Facenti, Dr. McNitt, would you like to add anything from the sort of public health side of things? Yeah, like what do we lose if we are not sustaining research funding for vaccine development?
I I don't think I have too much to add over what was
Mhm.
said, except just to underscore again that these things take so long to get through the pipeline. I think that the fact that the COVID vaccine went from like what's COVID to having vaccines going in arms in such a short time kind of skewed people's understanding of what it takes to create a vaccine and bring it to market and be sure that it's safe and then bring it to market.
Mhm.
That only happened because of an unprecedented, huge amount of money and international cooperation, all sorts of emergency changes to rules and all sorts of stuff to allow that to move quickly. And and that's just not the normal process. And we can't do that every time. And so if we're not constantly continuing to work through the pipeline and spend the years and years and years it takes to develop vaccines, study how to make them the safest they can possibly be and bring them up to scale, produce them and make them available to people, we have to keep investing in that before we need it. It's too late once we
Yeah, I
we
mean,
know
the
we
fact
need
that
it.
we were able to get a COVID vaccine in less than a year is because we had a lot of this, like, sort of uh,
That's right.
research, like, and funding for a lot of this development process.
That's right. Even
Yeah,
mRNA specifically, like that wasn't
exactly.
something
Yeah,
that was invented in 2020, right? Like that was something that had been being researched for a long time when no one knew what it was.
yeah.
And you're exactly right. I mean, I think that's we have to keep investing in this stuff so that when we need it, we've got it there.
Mhm. Yeah,
Can I just add just one quick thought?
yeah.
Just on this is something I think is all important for all of us to realize is that science is, of course, the pursuit of truth. And as has been mentioned, it's not like, you go from point A and then, ha ha, you're there at point B. Sometimes it's more meandering. But there is an ongoing war on truth, in our society. And that takes into it the war on science. And, when you put I tell people that it makes as much sense to have an attorney who may not necessarily be the greatest attorney in the world in charge of health and human services makes as much sense as it would be to find the most brilliant physician with no legal training and say, you should be a Supreme Court justice. That is really the level of almost insanity that is behind this. And of course, it's insulting to those of us in the field because it's like a slap in the face to our expertise. But just be aware that this is going on all around us. And, we really have to unite against this because we're really doomed if we let these forces win. That's my uplifting.
Well, on that note, I guess, so I think we are at time, but I do want to sort of just wrap up really quickly and ask just everyone to just give one very quick uh, idea of what do you wish everyone understood more about vaccines? Just a quick thought. I'll just hand it over to whoever wants to get started.
I wish people appreciated what a miracle they are and kind of what a miracle public health is in general. I mean, things that we don't even think about, like that you can go to your faucet in your kitchen and you can turn it on and you can get clean, safe drinking water is like huge. And a lot of people in the world don't have that. And how, that really affects how people live. And vaccines are really very much like that. Places where people don't have access to vaccines, life is very different. And, there's a lot of suffering and death that people have to live with because of that.
Yeah, I think I might just add, people who study vaccines and who know a lot about vaccines because of what they do for a living, they get vaccinated. They get their kids vaccinated. They tell everyone around them to get vaccinated. Like people who know how the sausage is made, to use that analogy, like they're grateful that they're able to get vaccinated. I include myself in that, but I know I'm not alone in that. And I just think that there's so much damage being done right now from RFK Jr. and others talking about like conflicts of interest on the committee and people who are on ACIP are rubber stamping vaccines and they're shills for pharma companies. And I mean, that's just not true. And it's, until this recent round, which is kind of an embarrassment, like the experts on ACIP really were trustworthy, skeptical, not letting things through unless they were convinced that the benefits of the vaccine far outweighed the risks. And I'm really sad to see that undermined. And I hope that we can get back to a place where people really trust the scientists who are doing this because they're not looking to rubber stamp. They take it very seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to look far to see conflict of interest in this administration, $400 million planes and people raising concerns about people getting, however many $10,000 from it. But yeah, I mean, I think that I guess what I would say in answer to the question is, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when smallpox was still around and I got vaccinated against it and it was eradicated. It was eradicated. So now we can't obviously be successful. Obviously, we need a flu shot every year because that virus, is very adept at evading and evolving. And so there's this constant battle going on between us and the world around us. And yeah, we just have to keep that in mind. We should think of ourselves as being kids and going to daycare, right? If you don't want to expose your kid to antigens, don't send them to daycare, right? So it is I think we need to kind of really keep in mind, as has been mentioned, that these are really, miraculous and really, really sort of mention like the millions of lives that they've saved.
Yeah, and I think my take is that I wish people would put some thought into why vaccines were developed to begin with. I mean, this goes way back to like Jenner and the smallpox vaccine. This was a huge deal when they first figured out that they could poke you with, relatively benign strain of the virus, and you could maybe get immunity to smallpox because people lived in terror of these outbreaks. And you don't have to look too far to talk to people who have lived experience of a vaccine being introduced and being very grateful for it. Talk to grandparents who lived through the polio epidemics, who wouldn't go to public pools in the summer because they were so worried about polio outbreaks. So I wish people would, kind of follow that line of thought and talk to the older generations who lined up for vaccines when they were introduced, because it's one of the most transformative parts of public health.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to thank all of the panelists for their time. And also, I really want to thank the organizing team for all of the time and effort that they put in to make this possible. Um, we will be sending a recording of this event out. So if you signed up through Mobilize, you'll be receiving that link. And then also, you'll be actually getting an email about giving us feedback. And we'd love to have feedback about this event because we'll likely be hosting other events related to vaccine and healthcare. And we'd like to be able to make this better in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for this really great conversation and for everyone's time. Really appreciate it.